Okay, I wanted to give you just a quick update on where I'm going to be speaking. And give me just 1 second here. And I just remembered I was supposed to have done this. So here we go. So I'm going to be gone some with Pam, and I'll be speaking a few times. I have 2 of them up here, and I'll give you all of them. Next Sunday, I'm pretty sure I'm speaking at Devore Community Church in Devore, California. It's right where the 15 and 215 freeways meet north of San Bernardino as it goes up over the mountain. And I'm not sure I don't even remember what time they start, 10 o'clock? I don't know. Look on their website, devoretruth.org. 10 o'clock, my wife, she says 10 o'clock. And then on Sunday, March 11th, both services, I'll be speaking at Rock Harbor Church in Bakersfield, California. Pastor Brandon Holthouse. So I'll do a prophecy update, second hour. I will do a teaching I've been working on. I hope to start working on. I've been thinking about for a while. And and I think their services, you'll have to check their Rock Harbor Church website for the time their services start. And then on March 14th, I'm going to speak at Blessed Hope Chapel Wednesday evening in Simi Valley, California, Pastor Joe Schimmel. Then the 16th, 17th, and 18th, I will be in Sacramento speaking at the One in Messiah Conference. It's at the Lionsgate Hotel. And if you just look up One in Messiah Conference, TribNet 7000 Facebook page has some information on it. You can message me, I'll get you the information. They just ask that you register in advance if you're coming or going to be. It'll be live streamed. Doug Krieger, Doug Hamp, Doug Shear, some other people and I will be speaking at that conference. So March 16th, 17th, 18th, One in Messiah Conference in Sacramento. And then there was one other thing I was thinking I was supposed to do. Oh, I'll be in San Francisco on Monday evening, March 5th, if somebody wants to come down and walk through the... did you see the story about this in San Francisco? They did a survey of the areas around like Union Square, which is a big tourist area and hotels and everything. And they made a map of all the places they found needles and feces, human feces on the street. And it was pretty shocking. So I'm going to be taking an old pair of shoes and a power washer, I think, with me. It's just in the liberal paradise of San Francisco. But if you message me or get me through the church email or whatever, if you'd like to get together on Monday evening, I'm tied up till 5 o'clock in a meeting. So I'll be there Monday evening, March 5th, in the formerly beautiful, now the stinky city by the bay. So today, on the brink. Now, the reason for this is, and we talk again each week about all of the different convergences. The reason for that I chose that title was that at the Munich Security Conference, a little bit of which I talked about last week, there was a panel, and I will play part of that panel near the end, and it was a commentator from BBC on foreign affairs, and at the end of the panel, and I didn't have time to pull the clip out, she said, what you've heard today from these people was a panel of U.S. Senators and congressmen, and she said, you have learned from what you've seen at this conference that the world is literally on the brink. And that was the theme of the Munich Security Conference, where all these government leaders and foreign ministers and secretaries of defense, and I'll have some clips of that today, which are pretty stunning. This is something that's developing quite a bit. So we'll talk about a few things, and then we're going to mostly focus on international security, concerns about war, and then some good news, but wrapped up in the good news, I think, is a very significant warning for a people group. And we'll talk about that at the end. And I have to finish at a certain time because we have a business meeting after church today. And I've been told they'll just pull the plug. So, but you got to get through me and this podium. So this is something to watch out for, this 5G. I don't know that they've really looked into the 5G networks, cell phone networks, the health effects of that. I'm a little concerned about that, but they're just going to be putting these, and they're starting to roll it out in different countries. And this is really one of the things that's coming, that's sort of bringing in artificial intelligence and healthcare and markers to identify you and that sort of thing. And it is it's a concerning thing. I think it has a lot of prophetic significance. I don't want to say too much about this, but the shooting in Florida, I talked a little bit about it last week. There are people that are playing other people and whipping them into a frenzy. And the town hall, or whatever that thing was that CNN did, where they were yelling at Dana Loesch, spokesperson for the IRA. It's just been absolutely, I'm not IRA. I'm thinking it's getting close to tax season, so I'm thinking of what deductions I might have here. Sorry, I had a slide out of order. The yelling at her because they did not agree with her. She said, if I did not have a security detail, I would not have gotten out of there without at least getting beat up. They were rushing the stage, calling her murderer. She said, I have a friend. She wanted to protect herself against rape, so she had a gun. And she was booed. It's just, the whole thing is out of control. It's all based on emotion. This is what I've talked about a long time, about the lack of concern for things like the truth and facts. I want you to, I posted on my Facebook page an article that a Facebook friend had sent me, and he sent me a couple things. This sheriff from Broward County, if I lived down there, I would be pushing to have him resign. Now, he just announced this morning, I'm not resigning. What do I have to resign for? But he had 4 deputies that didn't go in while the shooting was underway. His department ignored many, many warnings about this killer. Some were pretty stark. I mean, people calling up and saying, he's going to shoot up the school, and they don't follow up on it. Or they did follow up on it, but they didn't do anything about it. But the article that my friend Daniel sent me was, I think, indicative of what happened. What happened over the last number of years was to improve their crime statistics, and in an effort to close down what they called the school prison pipeline, they started, for lack of a better term, with juveniles involved in crime. They started looking the other way. For example, people that had property stolen did not get their property returned to them. It was collected by the police department or the sheriff's department. And Broward County was one of the main big cities in the country that did this. They collected the stolen property, but they never reported it as a crime. The juvenile, because they didn't want to label these people as criminals and somehow affect them. And so drug and property crimes and even some violent crimes were looked at and ignored. And this has gone on in Pittsburgh and LA and other places. And I would only suggest that it appears that we have morons in charge. That they think this is, and this is the result, okay? So this is the result, and hold the people accountable that actually did it. Not an organization that supports the Second Amendment. It's moronic, and what went on at that town hall on CNN was just absolutely shocking to me. Look, I know people are upset. I'm upset too, okay? But don't start blaming other people. well, you got to look at some of the video of it. It's just absolutely stunning. So let's look at geopolitics in the Middle East and all this. In in Syria, or what we still pretend is a country called Syria, there has been bombing underway in rebel-held areas that people are calling the massacre of the century. That's from the Arab News. A catastrophe. In eastern Ghouta, which would be an area to the east of Damascus, it mainly has been a farming area. It has been mostly Sunni Muslim Arabs live in that area. And one of the things that I've suggested to you is that as part of this remaking Syria that's been engaged in by Assad and with the help of the Russians and the Iranians has been, and the head of NATO talked about this, was that they have been heavily bombing Sunni areas. Now look, from Assad's standpoint, I can bomb those areas because they're opposed to my government. And I don't want to get into the fine details, but what they've done is essentially tried to uproot the Sunni population of Syria and get them to move somewhere else. And that's why you see this. By the way, you should go, if you want to see a good panel on this, yesterday, Secure Freedom, Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney, it wasn't yesterday, it was Friday. You can find it on the Secure Freedom YouTube channel. It was a panel with Diana West, I can't remember the one lady's name, and Katie Hopkins from Great Britain. And they were talking about immigration and the problems associated with immigration and the Red-Green Alliance. And you'll see a question in there by my friend Phil Haney, who stood up and asked a question at the end of it. It's a very good panel, and you should look at it. And it was talking about the problems that they have in Europe. And Katie Hopkins has gone into, she shared her story, and a lot of people don't like her. She's mean, she's nasty, she's racist, all this stuff. But she said she went to Sweden to check it out. Are there no-go zones? And she was on the metro or public subway or transportation system, and there was a stop, and everybody got off. She said it looked like me. She's blonde-haired. And one lady says, you're not going on further, are you? It's not safe for you to go any further on the subway in the suburb of Stockholm. Listen, because it's where all these immigrants live. And it is, and the police will ignore it. They'll do like the police in Broward County and other cities in the United States and counties, and they ignore certain crime, and then they can say, well, look at the statistics. Well, they're cooking the books. It's just absolutely stunning. So Turkey, at the same time that we have this going on in eastern Ghouta, Turkey has moved down into northern Syria around Afrin in an effort to, in this area up here in Syria, and they're trying to move back in. And Turkey's made a lot of statements this week. Erdogan was talking, and he was talking a lot about, he was talking in terms of, we want to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. And he's been he's been threatening some of the islands that are owned by Greece. He's going to take them over. And he wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, an Islamic empire. And then look at the maps of where they went from the Balkans to Iran and included all of the Middle East. And he wants to reestablish that. That failed 100 years ago. Turkey seems to be very much dedicated to doing this. And it's interesting. Look, there's a lot of question about how good their military is. I think right now Turkey is trying to show how tough they are. I don't know how tough they are. The people in Turkey love their military. But what happened, remember, was about a year and a half ago, they had a coup attempt. Whether it was staged or not is irrelevant. What happened after that coup attempt was thousands of journalists, teachers, educators, government bureaucrats, and military personnel, especially the upper echelons of the military, were purged, put in prison, and there's been trials going on. And what happened was Erdogan, I think, significantly weakened his military to the point that he needs help, he needs a patron to watch over him, and so one of the people that he's reached out to is Vladimir Putin of Russia. Now, this has, I think, prophetic implications in an end-time alliance, but he needs the support of Russia right now, so he's reaching out to Russia. But he's also making these shows of force, but there's been some, they haven't advanced very far. They put a lot of equipment and tanks and that sort of thing there into the area around Afrin. So it's something that I think bears watching. It just, and I had mentioned many months ago that he really wanted to take over that northern part of Syria all the way down to Mosul, in part because it's an oil-rich region. Over around Dar el-Zor, where it's now come out that over 200 Russian mercenaries were killed in a U.S. airstrike near the oil-rich areas. They were going across, they'd crossed over the Euphrates and were taking back that area. And the Kurds are there, which we support, and we also support some of the rebel groups, and it's all very complicated. It's one of those, it looks like spaghetti charts as to who supports who. And our F-22s went in and took out some tanks, and the number is up above, I believe, above 200. Russia's been very quiet about it. They have reacted. You'll see that in just a moment. So the UN met. They want to get this situation under control. They had a meeting on, I believe it was Friday, and they unanimously approved, the Security Council unanimously approved a immediate 30-day ceasefire in the region, which they've never worked, but they're trying to do something because there is a slaughter underway. There are people dying, barrel bombs being dropped, and that sort of thing. And everybody has a reason for why it is. And this is in the eastern suburbs of Damascus, and Damascus continues to be more and more a pile of rubble. Not completely, but a large chunk of that city is gone. So a lot of people are concerned about this as the Turkeys push into Afrin. The Kurds are mad. We have a relationship with the Kurds. The Russians don't really like the Kurds. The Iranians don't like the Kurds. The Kurds want their own state. They're the largest ethnic group, I believe, on the planet that does not have their own country. And they're in areas of Syria, Syria, Iraq, and Iran is where the Kurds live. They're the descendants, I think, of the ancient Medes, of the Medo-Persian Empire. And they want their country. They have an oil-rich region. They have a lot of money. And the interesting thing is when you get up into this area of northern Syria, up here around Afrin, they are largely Sunni Kurds. Sunni Kurds. And Turkey is Sunni Muslims. And so you have Sunnis fighting Sunnis. And you have Shiite fighting Sunnis. And the whole situation is a powder keg. And you'll hear some quotes here in just a moment from the security conference. Russia has sort of responded. They have moved in their Su-57. It's a fifth-generation fighter, stealth plane. It's their best fighter. Some people call it the F-22, and it's been seen now and photographed by Israeli intelligence at airfields in Syria, a number of them. Supposedly can fire a missile, a rocket in battle that will go twice as far as the rockets that the F-22 Raptor, one of our stealth fighters, can fire, which sort of changes the name of the game in the battle. They've had a lot of mechanical problems with it. It may not be as a good a fighter as they lead you to believe. One of the reasons they may be moving it is to Syria is to try it out in the field, and if they try it out in the field and it looks good, and maybe they shoot down one of our F-22s or an Israeli F-16, then they will be able to sell more of the things. And this is what part of what Russia's been doing, is testing some of its weapon systems in Syria so they can sell their weapons and arms to other people and make some money off of it. Well, The Atlantic had a number of articles about the Munich Security Conference. One was a weekend for ignoring signs of doom. And I feel The Atlantic is a left-leaning magazine, but I find it to be one of the more reasonable left-leaning magazines on the planet. And they have, I think, good, thoughtful articles from time to time. Elliot Cohen wrote, "Witnessing the Collapse of the Global Elite." And his point was, I sat there and I watched all of these people talk, and they talked about security and, nuclear capabilities and what's happening. And the answer they came back with was nobody had a solution. So I want to play you some clips. The first clip is a Senator James Risch. I'm not sure where he's from. I think he's maybe from Montana. He is going to take over the Intelligence Committee, the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, after the next election. And he had some questions about what he sees happening and where it might end up, particularly with regard to North Korea.
Turning to North Korea, the answer that I'm going to give is really quite easy to give, although the message is pretty dire. And that is that this is a really dangerous situation that we're facing right now on the Korean Peninsula. I would argue that there's no, from a mass casualty standpoint, there is no more dangerous place on the planet than the Korean Peninsula right now. This is all in the hands of and the mind of a single person, and that, of course, is Kim Jong-un. What he does, what he decides to do, is going to be decisive of how this matter resolves. And it is not going to resolve well if he continues on the course that he is continuing on. The President of the United States has said, and he is committed to, seeing that Kim Jong-un is not able to marry together a delivery system with a nuclear weapon that he can deliver to the United States. He has said that very clearly. That is, our president has said that very clearly. And anyone who doubts the president's commitment to see that that doesn't happen does so really at their own peril. The consequences of that are breathtaking when you think about how this could happen. There is no bloody nose policy. The administration says they've never used the term, they've never considered the strategy. There is no such thing. And if you think about it, it absolutely makes sense. If this thing starts, it's going to be probably one of the worst catastrophic events in the history of our civilization, but it is going to be very, very brief. The end of it is going to see mass casualties, the likes of which the planet has never seen. It will be of biblical proportions.
Well, the article in The Atlantic goes on to say, the Risch intervention summed up the paradox at the heart of this year's Munich Security Conference, whose official theme was "to the brink and back." There was no overarching threat or narrative that captivated participants. There was no sense of urgency, no feeling that we were truly on the brink. But if you looked, red lights were flashing everywhere. One of those was when Prime Minister Netanyahu hung up. The article says, the Middle East appears on the verge of a new conflict involving Israel and Iran and its proxy forces in Syria and Lebanon. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, provided the conference with its Munich moment as he held up a piece of Iranian drone and asked Javad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, if he recognized it. He went on to say that if Iran continues to try to establish a president in Syria, Israel will go to war to prevent it. Zarif dismissed Netanyahu's accusations as a cartoonish circus, but convinced no one with his argument that Iran was not trying to dominate the Middle East. Look at just a little bit of what Zarif said in the Q&A session.
References the Netanyahu speech. I quote, "What must happen for Iran to accept the right of existence of Israel? Question mark.
Well, you see, the entire speech was trying to evade the issue. What has happened in the past several days has been that the so-called invincibility has crumbled. Israel uses aggression as a policy against its neighbors. Mass reprisals against its neighbors, daily incursions into Syria, Lebanon, and other Arab countries, daily bombardments, almost routine bombardments of Syria. And once the Syrians have the guts to down one of its planes, it's as if a disaster has happened. Disaster is aggression. Disaster is the policy of violating the most basic rights of the Palestinians. Don't look for excuses. I'm focusing on our region because I believe Iran's interests are best protected in the Persian Gulf region. People should not look for excuses because of their inherent inability to resolve the problems and blame it on others. They can blame it forever on Iran, but that won't resolve their problems. It's the problem of aggression, it's the problem of occupation, it's the problem of, I'm not talking about domestic corruption and all of that, I mean, that's another problem. But it's a problem, it's a problem of trying to escape responsibility for the criminal policies that they followed for many years and trying to find a scapegoat for that, and sometimes people give them that as scapegoat.
You know, one of the things we do as lawyers is we sometimes take classes about how to tell if someone is lying. And it's hard with some people, but in some cases, case study in point would be Foreign Minister Zarif. One of the reasons you can tell someone is lying is they don't answer the question. And did he answer the question? He was asked a question about Israel, and he refused to answer. He completely deflected. So once he starts doing that, you can pretty much assume that everything that he says after that is a big fat lie. And his whole, it's stunning that he would do this. If you put him on a lie detector, it would flatline. It would be flat. There would be no response or tension for lying. This is the panel called Widening the Gulf. There was a Minister of Foreign Affairs from Turkey. There was Yaqub Reed Saraf, who is the National Defense Minister. This is from left to right of Lebanon. There's a man from the League of Arab States, John Kerry. Okay, I'm not playing a clip of John Kerry, I'm pretty sure. So I'm not promising because I don't remember, but I thought, I don't really need him because he was defending the JCPOA with Iran and criticizing Netanyahu and the Trump administration because, of course, he had it also right. And then there's the Russian guy next to Kerry. There's a UN special envoy to Syria, and then the BBC Foreign Affairs commentator. And her name is Lise Doucette, Chief International Correspondent for BBC. So here is a comment. I'm only going to play a little bit of it. You can find this at the Munich Security Conference website. All the videos are there. I think some of them are worth. This is called Widening the Gulf. And Ms. Doucette, the moderator, referred to it as a chasm at one point. We're creating a chasm in the Middle East, and nobody seems to have a solution. But this is the Lebanon defense minister talking mainly about Israel. Listen to what he says.
What we know for a fact, that thanks to Mr. Netanyahu, we froze our butts outside, and he reminded us what the meaning of refugee means, what it means to be outside your country for 70 years in the freezing death.
Netanyahu went long in his speech.
To remind you what Secretary General Guterres said. We're not talking about Middle East. We're not talking about widening Gulf. We're talking about global Middle East. And global Middle East means everybody is involved. And means that there is no makeshift solution for Kurds or for Shia or for Palestinians. It is time, if you really believe that you want to make peace, it is time to sit and solve the whole issue. And the whole issue in my book starts with Palestine. Whether you declare it a capital or not, this is totally your internal affairs. But you cannot deny that 4 billion persons on earth today turn to Palestine and to Jerusalem saying, this is also my capital. And before we look at the whole image, I do not believe that makeshift solutions, temporary agreements, temporary arrangements, makeshift solutions, help this one against this one, help this one in Lebanon, be against him in China, help this faction in Syria, be against it in Iran or in Iraq. What is most important, and this is the message I'm sending to you, we in Lebanon are a small country, and I need to tell you what I heard in this conference. It's always the big country that voices concern about its security and its threat from a small appendix which is stuck in his side. It is time for the big countries to say, I am part of this and I am part of the solution.
Your Excellency, what I think some of us here in Munich has heard, that a war between Iran and Israel and Hezbollah is just a matter of time, sadly, but I'm sure you've heard it as well.
Let me tell you, $22 billion is what our southern neighbor spends on defense. $1.2 billion is what my country spends on its defense. For the past 15 years, we have not had one single aggression from Lebanon to the south. For the past 15 years, we have had 158 monthly aggressions from the south on Lebanon. Can you believe it that they actually bomb Syria from Lebanese airspace? And they say that they are threatened?
Can you just respond, just because it is a question that may be hanging in people's minds at the moment. We've just had the Israeli Prime Minister holding up a piece of a drone, which he said was an Iranian drone that went into Israel. But with the warnings that this will not be tolerated, and Lebanon would be drawn in, does this moment worry you?
I have 24/7 drone Israeli above my head.
It is, and you have to recognize this, it is the environment that triggered and that established the Daesh. And that is directly related to the lack of a Palestinian settlement. Why is it so? Because there is real and deep anger in the region, a deep anger with the youth and with the populations. Why are we leaving the Palestinians the way they are? So settle the Palestinian question, change the culture, and then you will have a pacified Middle East, enabling the issue of regional arrangements.
Okay.
So there were two people, the representative of the Organization of Islamic States or Arab States and the defense minister of Lebanon. And what did they both say was the most critical issue in the Middle East? The Palestinian state. And did you notice that the Lebanese defense minister didn't mention Hezbollah and its rockets? Okay, he's lying. Now look, has Israel gone up there a bunch? You bet they have. Because they're insecure. We have friends that live in Nahariya, 6-minute drive south of the Lebanon border with Israel in the north. You think they worry about Hezbollah rockets? My friend told me, if it's a direct, we don't have even time with the rockets they have now to get to a bomb shelter. And if it's targeted, if it hits us, we're done. And that's what they live with every day. So, but they all tied it, they're constantly tying us to the Palestinian issue. And he talks about this is the most important issue on the planet. We've got to get this peace worked out. We've got to come together as a world and get this resolved. Now, does this sound anything like a world that the biblical prophets described a couple thousand years ago, 2,000 to 3,000? It's exactly like they described, and it's centered in the areas that they talked about. The Atlantic article continues that the Israel-Iran clash in Syria is just one of several flashpoints in the region. Others include possible collapse of the nuclear deal, tensions between Turkey and the United States, and clashes between Russian and American forces. Also remarkable was that the speakers failed to bring up there was no discussion of artificial intelligence and the way it is transforming geopolitics. The challenge to China, the last sentence, that China poses to Europe and the United States was particularly conspicuous by its absence. And I started this off with what? China establishing these 5G networks. One Belt, One Road initiative. $1 trillion being spent on that, bringing in all of these countries between China and Europe, going through the land bridge there, which happens to be Israel. It concludes with this, but it was not a year for bravery, usefulness, or faith. It was a year for false bravado, contradiction, and selfishness. The question we left with is this: we know that things are bad in our world today, but will they break? Judging from the proceedings in Munich, we will need to be very lucky in the year ahead for the answer to be no. And so I will give the Atlantic credit for a very thoughtful article, and one that I share its concerns with, especially when you layer an understanding of Bible prophecy on top of it. At a special event in Portugal to honor him, I played a clip of him last week. Secretary General Guterres from the United Nations said he warned of a nightmare scenario if Israel and Hezbollah clash. At the UN this week, Mahmoud Abbas came and called for a global summit leading to a Palestinian state. A global summit. He urged the world leaders to come together in peace talks. Look at what happened as he was walked into the room here at the UN Security Council. This took place on Tuesday last week in New York. And he's walked in with a special greeting. The Israel guy didn't walk in with a special greeting. Nobody else did. At least there was nothing in the video.
Unfortunately, positive developments in Iraq are an exception in the region. This context underscores the need for a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has lasted for far too long. I am here to reiterate my full personal commitment and the commitment of the United Nations to supporting the parties in their efforts to achieve a two-state solution. A solution of two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace with secure and recognized borders. A solution that addresses all final state issues on status issues on the basis of relevant United Nations resolutions, international law, and mutual agreements. There is no plan B.
And there is no plan B. Mahmoud Abbas, this is the first part of his speech. 70 years have passed, and 70 is always, I think, a fairly significant number in the Bible. It was the period of captivity of Israel and Babylon, and we've talked a lot about that. 70 years have passed since Palestine's Nakba, from which 6 million Palestinian refugees continue to suffer the cruelty of exile and loss of human security. They continue to wander the world after the loss of their peaceful and stable lives in their homeland. They are part of the 13 million Palestinians. I mean, they're making them up. Whose country is not yet recognized as full member state of the United Nations, despite the numerous resolutions reaffirming their right to self-determination and statehood on their national land. And listen to what he said. This is a quote, "We are the descendants," comes from the official transcript, "we are the descendants of the Canaanites that lived in the land of Palestine 5,000 years ago and continuously remain there to this day. Our great people remain rooted in their land. The Palestinian people built their own cities and homeland and made contributions to humanity and civilization witnessed by the world. They established institutions, schools, hospitals, cultural organizations, theaters, libraries, newspapers, publishing houses, economic organizations, businesses, and banks with wide regional and international influence. And this is he spoke in Arabic, so here is the translation of the final part of his speech, and watch what happens.
This Security Council, ladies and gentlemen, is the highest entity to which the peoples of the world seek sanctuary and protection. After this council, we rest our issue to the Almighty. The Almighty. Until Judgment Day. For if justice for our people cannot be attained here, then to where should we go? We call upon you, we beg you to help us. Help us so that we do not commit an act that goes against our beliefs and your beliefs. Thank you so much.
President of Kuwait, the President of the Security Council.
أشكر فخامة الرئيس محمود عباس رئيس دولة فلسطين.
I thank His Excellency President Mahmoud Abbas, President of the Observer State of Palestine, for his
Mahmoud
statement.
Abbas has left the building. Why? Because the next speaker was Danny Danon, the Israeli ambassador. At the time, Abbas is losing everything. He went to the hospital down there. He talked in his speech about how wonderful that is. If we were in charge, there would be freedom of religion. Hamas could lose control of Gaza to radicals. I mean, Hamas is radical. And they could lose to more radical people. So this is going on. This is tensions a lot. Tensions with Lebanon are heating up. And to the extent that there's this fake claim by this guy, Abbas, the democratically elected leader. Yeah, he was democratically elected to a 4-year term 14 years ago. So he's in the 14th year of a 4-year term. And they want to say, well, we'll recognize freedom of religion. Really? I want you to go to Facebook. If you're on Facebook, go to Avi Abelow's website, AVI and Abelo, ABLOW. He does a thing called the Israeli Video Network. You've seen him. I've played clips of him interviewing Melanie Phillips and Caroline Glick and others in this week. And what they did was a group of 4 congressmen came from the United States, and they went with a group of Jews, Chaim Richman, the head of the Temple Institute, was in the group, and they went up on the Temple Mount. And there's an hour long video there of their visit to the Temple Mount. They're followed by police. And at one point, an American congressman, and what they wanted to experience was not what Americans experience when they go up there. It's bad enough. What do Jews experience? They have to go through 13 gates that lead up to the Temple Mount. Jews can enter through 1 and exit through 2. This is a fact. And during the thing, every time they looked like they were stopping, they have to keep moving the whole time. Because if they stop, they cannot look down with their head, because it's considered praying and they will be arrested. The walk, it's freedom of religion. The U.S. congressman, I believe it's Scott Tipton and David McKinley. One of them, as they were walking along, bent over and picked up an olive branch that had fallen off one of the olive trees that are up there on the Temple Mount. I've seen them. As they were exiting the Temple Mount, these 2 congressmen were taken by the Israeli police because the Muslim Waqf, who operates under the authority of the Jordanian government, had said they needed to be detained because bending over to pick up an olive branch in a group of Jews was considered an act of worship. Don't tell me Mahmoud Abbas is one of the biggest liars in the world, in world history. And he is applauded at the UN. How sick is that? On a scale of sickness, like that crazy CNN town hall, that's down here. applauding Mahmoud Abbas, who wrote his PhD thesis to deny the Holocaust? The world is sick. And the world's looking for an answer to that problem. What do you think the answer is going to be? What do the prophets tell us? Here's Danny Danon responding.
I expected Mr. Abbas to stay with us and have a dialogue. Unfortunately, he's once again running away. Look what just happened in this room. Mr. Abbas came in, he put his demands on the table, and he left, and he's expecting you to deliver the results. It's not going to work that way. The only way to move forward is to have direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. Mr. President, it is unfortunate that we are meeting here today. For the past 7.5 years, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, has refused to meet even once with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He has refused to negotiate peace. Yet, during that same time, Mr. Abbas has made 7 trips here to the United Nations. Today, once again, rather than driving just 12 minutes between Ramallah to Jerusalem, he has chosen to fly 12 hours to New York to avoid the possibility of peace.
He then went on to the hospital at Johns Hopkins. They say for he says it was just routine medical tests. I don't know. I don't believe anything he says. Okay, so we'll see what happens. And I guess I've heard he's either bought or is going to buy a new $50 million jet, so he doesn't have to fly coach. Nikki Haley also responded.
This session on the Middle East has been taking place each month for many, many years. Its focus has been almost entirely on issues facing Israelis and Palestinians. And we have heard many of the same arguments and ideas over and over again. We have already heard them again this morning. And of course, there is the terrorist-sponsoring regime in Iran that initiates and encourages most of the troubles I just outlined. These immense security and humanitarian challenges throughout the region should occupy more of our attention rather than having us sit here month after month and use the most democratic country in the Middle East as a scapegoat for the region's problems. But here we go again. We are joined here today by Palestinian Authority President Abbas. I'm sorry he declined to stay in the chamber to hear the remarks of others. We welcome you as the leader of the Palestinian people here today. But I will decline the advice I was recently given by your top negotiator, Saeb Erekat. I will not shut up. Rather, I will respectfully speak some hard truths.
And she went on to speak about what happened in December of 2016 when the U.S. refused for the first time to exercise its veto power on Resolution 2334, which contains this, underlines that it will not recognize any changes to the June 4, 1967 lines, including with regard to Jerusalem, other than those agreed to by the parties. A number of publications immediately jumped on the fact that Trump's attempt to strike the ultimate Middle East deal, and by the way, did you see who was sitting behind Nikki Haley as she spoke? Jason Greenblatt to the right and Jared Kushner to the left. You'll hear about them in just a moment. So, foreign policy said, Trump's attempt to get a big deal is not going anywhere. This was followed on the heels of that meeting by an announcement that just occurred, I think, on Thursday or Friday, that the United States will move its embassy to Jerusalem and open it in May to coincide at least with the Gentile calendar, the Gregorian calendar, 70th anniversary of Jerusalem Independence Day. Now, I hope they do it sooner because in Israel it will be celebrated on April 20th because that's the 5th of Iyar, which is the Jewish month, the day of independence. May 14th, 1948 was the 5th of ER on the Jewish calendar. And therefore, to look up, you have to do a calendar conversion. And so April 20th this year is equivalent to that day on the Jewish calendar. That will be the 70th anniversary. Sheldon Adelson has offered to fund the move, and the State Department people are all going crazy. Prime Minister Netanyahu issued this very short response.
This is a great moment for the State of Israel. President Trump's decision to move the American embassy to Jerusalem will make our Independence Day celebrations even happier. Thank you, President Trump, for your leadership and for your friendship.
Now, there are people that are very pleased with Trump. There's supposedly this medal with Cyrus and Trump on one side and the temple on the other. I don't know if this is to raise money or not. This was an article that appeared. Nikki Haley went to University of Chicago on Thursday to the Chicago School Institute of Politics and did a short speech and then was interviewed by a guy named David Axelrod. You might remember him as the former campaign manager and chief of staff for President Obama. And she was asked about this Mideast peace. What's it going to happen? This was her short response.
The negotiations and the ultimate peace process is not going to be what the United States wants. It's what Israel and the Palestinian Authority decides they want. They're going to have to decide borders. They're going to have to decide property. They're going to have to decide how all of that plays out. What the role of the United States is going to be, Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt have been the negotiators with both sides. They are coming up with a plan. The plan won't be loved by either side, and it won't be hated by either side, but it's a template to start talking.
When are we going to see that plan?
I think they're finishing it up. I mean, they're still going back and forth, but the way they've come up with that plan is by listening to Palestinians and listening to Israelis.
Okay, so here's the good news from the week. You may have seen this reported in the Israeli press and other places around the world. Times of Israel headline, "In find of biblical proportions, seal of the prophet Isaiah said to be found in Jerusalem." And I believe that it was found. I believe it is accurate. There's a couple letters that are missing, but it looks like a seal, and it says Seal of Isaiah. It was found in Jerusalem. It's actually found in the area of the Ophel. You see the red area down here. Temple Mount, the western wall would be going from left to right at the top. That's where the Western Wall Plaza, you can kind of see it there in the, I guess I have my little, this is the Western Wall Plaza. This would be the Western Wall. And it was somewhere over in this area that the U.S. congressman had the audacity to bend over and pick up an olive branch off the ground. And, you know, but it was an olive branch. You understand? He was arrested for picking up an olive branch in one of the most hotly contested places on the planet. Think about that for just a moment. And so in this area was found this seal of the prophet Isaiah. Now, in 2 Kings chapter 18, and I'm not going to go into great detail about it today. One of the talks I do in California will build on this a little bit further. But Ezekiel was the prophet at the time of King Hezekiah. Here is a chart of and you can find these on the internet, of all the prophets and kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, and of the southern kingdom. So for example, here you see Saul, David, and Solomon. Then the kingdom splits to the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom of Israel is destroyed by the Assyrians. Around 722 BC, the Assyrian army comes down in a series of waves and attacks on the northern kingdom. At the time this is going on, if you go straight down here, this is all happening at the time of King Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Here is the prophet. Okay, so here's the Assyrian destruction. This prophet Isaiah warned about that coming destruction. Hosea warned about it. And they overlapped. The northern kingdom was destroyed, people carried away into captivity. But you see here, Isaiah lived at the time of King Hezekiah. So back to 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father David did. He was a good king. He was unlike every other king. Every king in the northern kingdom was a bad king. You've heard my teaching on Ezekiel chapter 23, maybe. You can find it online, talking about what the idolatry that was going on in the northern kingdom, and which followed later in the southern kingdom. They didn't learn their lesson. Here's what Hezekiah did. He removed the high places and brake the images and cut down the groves and brake in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it. So the bronze serpent that Moses had lifted up in the wilderness to heal the people, if they would look on what was lifted up, they would be physically saved and healed. And they had turned it into an idol. And Hezekiah, under operating with the advice, I'm sure, of Isaiah, said it's an idol, it has to be destroyed. And it was destroyed. He rebuilt the wall. And it says this of him, great in 2 Kings, he trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him. For he clave to the Lord and departed not from following him, but kept his commandments which the Lord commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him, and he prospered whithersoever he went forth. And he rebelled against the king of Assyria and served him not. And so at the time of the king of Assyria, Hezekiah is the king. And he resists the king of Assyria, although he did pay him some tribute. Now, why is that significant? Because 10 feet away from where they found the seal of Isaiah, they found a few years ago, I think it came out in December 2015, so a little about 2 years ago actually, they found a seal of King Hezekiah in the Ophel, which was the dump area near a royal bakery where they would have dumped things from the Temple Mount. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Now, you need to understand a little bit about the geography. I should be done in about 6 or 7 minutes. This is Israel, the city of Jerusalem, looking from the south to the north. And the original city of David was located in this area here. Okay, so the Ophel would have been here. The royal palace of David would have been here. Reports I have been given say that they have discovered what they believe to be the tomb of David. They found tombs, and the kings were only ever buried in the palace. Here's a more modern picture of it. If you remember, I did a prophecy update with Brian Schrager and Bill Koenig from what they call it the Promenade. It's also called the Hill of Evil Council. It's right next to where the UN has its headquarters in Israel. And it's this beautiful view looking north. This would be, over here would be the Mount of Olives. This is the southern part of the Temple Mount. And I don't think you realize how hilly it is in Jerusalem. And if you walked around, Brian and I walked around the old city one day, and I know it seemed like everything was up. I mean, that's okay, because it's because I'm an old guy, and it's pretty steep. And so the original city of David would have been in here. Of course, you have the Kidron Valley, you have a central valley. Let's see, I have another picture that would show. Well, at one point in time, okay, I've got more to show you. In 2 Kings chapter 9, the story continues, and the king of Assyria is attacking the north. People are flooding into Jerusalem. And when King Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and entered into the house of the Lord. Then he sent Eliakim, who was over the household with Shebna, the scribe, and to the elders and priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos. So the same king whose seal is found at the Ophel in Jerusalem, 10 feet away, 10 feet, they find, it's very small. I mean, it would fit on the end of a ring, on top of a ring, so they could make a seal. Now, at the time, the king of Assyria was Sennacherib, and in 3 museums around the world, in the British Museum, the Oriental Museum in Chicago, and the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, is what they call the Prism of Sennacherib. And this is a cuneiform writing, and it talks about, it's 6-sided, it talks about the history of Sennacherib and his great victories in battles. And it talks about how he went into the southern kingdom and he destroyed 46 cities. And this appears to be historically accurate. One of the cities that fell, and I don't think it fell to Sennacherib, it might have fallen to the prior king, was the city of Samaria. We've been there. And in Samaria, it sits way up on a hill and had a very high wall. So for 3 years, it was under siege before it fell. This is a picture of the royal palace. The palace was built, the city was founded and built by 2 kings of the northern kingdom, Omri and his son Ahab. Ahab had a wife named Jezebel. You may have read about them in the Bible. And in this area of the royal palace, they have found the tombs of Omri and Ahab. All of this confirms the Bible. It sits way up on a hill. This is a view looking to the south from near the palace area. Now, when the Assyrians came into Israel, faithful people, part of the faithful remnant, fled. They got out of town. There is a warning in Matthew chapter 24 that when you see certain things, what does it say? You're in Jerusalem, get out of town. Flee into the wilderness. And we know that happens after the abomination of desolation, which is the middle point of the 70th week of Daniel. And 2 Thessalonians tells us that you'll be able to identify the Antichrist because he's the one who goes in there and does it. Now, I don't have time to get into it. I'll talk more about that later. There's a dispute as to how you identify the Antichrist. I think that's the definitive way. And I'll explain why in one of my, you have to listen to one of my talks in California. And then you don't know which ones, you're going to have to listen to all of them. I may wait till the last one. As I said, most of them they'll all be up on the internet and live streamed or whatever. What happened was that at the time, this is the geography of Jerusalem. Over here you have the Mount of Olives. You have the Kidron Valley. This essentially runs north to south. You have the Central Valley. This is the original city of David. It is part of the eastern hill on top of which is the Temple Mount and a rocky outcropping where they built Solomon's temple and the Temple of Herod. And I know there's people who disagree with that, and that's a whole different talk. But at the time of Hezekiah, what happened was so many people fled from the north to a place of refuge. Where did they flee? They fled to Jerusalem. And so what happened was the city expanded onto the Western Hill, and the Western Hill is higher, it may be higher than the Mount of Olives. There's certainly, the top of the Mount of Olives and the top of the Western Hill are pretty similar. And when you see the old city, you look at it and it's, you don't see it. When you walk it, you understand everything is uphill. At least it seems like for me. So here is the Central Valley that runs through. To the right would have been the original city of David. This is the Pool of Siloam. There's the Gihon Spring. And what Hezekiah did was he dug a tunnel down here to feed the Pool of Siloam so that they had water. What do people in the Middle East need? What do you need every day? You need water. And so the Western Hill, this area over here, was built by, this grew during the time of Hezekiah. It expanded tremendously. It was referred to as a sheepfold. Why? Because it was an area where the faithful remnant, the sheep of Israel, were being protected. We know that when they flee, they'll be protected in another place near Basra, which actually means sheepfold, by the way, near Petra. I'm sure this is all just a coincidence that at this point of history, the first thing outside the Bible to confirm the prophet Isaiah is found in Jerusalem. A Mahmoud Abbas. Did you know that? So you can see here, this is another picture of the ancient city, the Central Valley, and of course what happened on the Western Hill. So Isaiah prophesied, and in 2 Kings chapter 19, and you can read about this in Isaiah 35, I believe it is. Then this shall be the sign for you. They were distressed. They thought the Assyrians were going to come down and kill them. They destroyed 46 cities, fortified cities. 46. They've got one to go. And this shall be a sign for you. You will eat this year what grows of itself, in the second year what springs from the same, and in the third year sow, reap, plant vineyards, and eat their fruit. Now, what does that sound like? We're going to win. It's not going to happen. You're going to plant vineyards and you're going to eat. You're protected here. It is high time that people in Israel understand that the commands of Jesus Christ will need to be followed in the future. They need to be warned. They need to be told. When you see this happen, if you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, you need to just trust me. Please believe me. Look at what happened at the time of Isaiah. The guy whose seal they just found over there on the Temple Mount, out off the Temple Mount. The surviving remnant of the house of Judah will again take root downward and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem will go forth a remnant, and out of Mount Zion survivors. The zeal of the Lord will perform this. You see, there are prophecies about the Jewish people and Israel, but there are prophecies about the land too. And the UN doesn't realize that, or they ignore it. Verse 32, therefore thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he will not come to this city or shoot an arrow there. He will not come up before it with shield or throw up a siege ramp against it. By the way he came, by the same he will return, and he shall not come to this city, declares the Lord, for I will defend this city to save it for my own sake. This is what is said in Ezekiel chapter 36. I'm doing these things for my sake and my name and for my servant David's sake. Then it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians who were getting ready to come against Jerusalem. And when the men rose early in the morning, behold, all of them were dead. How many of them were dead? All of them. Every single one. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. We know that as Mosul in modern-day Iraq. Has that been in the news over the last few years? Of course. It came about as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer killed him with the sword, and they escaped. Here's the rest of the verse. And they escaped. Well, I messed up my slides. And so on this pillar, this prism, Sennacherib prison, that you can find in 3 different museums, and they vary a little bit, because when you're doing the cuneiform on a clay prism, there's no backspace delete like there is in Microsoft Word or anything. So they vary a little bit. But you can read, they've translated this. This is historical fact. And Sennacherib says, I went down there, I destroyed 46 cities. That appears to be historically accurate from archaeological digs. And then he says, I got talent from Hezekiah and I came home. He never mentions 185,000 dead. That's what kings often don't do that. You talk about fake news and the press, having control of the press, literally having control of the press here. Sennacherib didn't tell that, but the Bible tells us that. And the southern kingdom was spared, only to fall into idolatry later and be taken into captivity by the Babylonians. So listen, folks, it is very significant, and I apologize for going over, but this is really important, that the biblical prophets who spoke of the end times, proof is being found of their existence. It is incredibly significant. And the seal of Hezekiah, I'll put that in my longer talk, but it says Hezekiah Ahaz, the son of Ahaz. And then there's a reference to being king of Judah. Mahmoud Abbas will lie about that too. But it is very important that the prophets who spoke for their time, who spoke for the time of the first coming of Jesus Christ, and who spoke for the second coming of Jesus Christ, need to be paid attention to. Because what they said was real. And their existence has been verified. And what they said about those events came true. What they said about the future events will come true too. Let's pray. Father, thanks so much for the faithful people here. Pray that you'll watch over us. Those who are ill and those who've lost loved ones recently, we just pray that you will comfort them, help us to reach out and help and comfort them. And Lord, I just pray that you will give us wisdom as to how to share the message of the significance of the times in which we live. Because as the senator said at the Munich Security Conference, there's a time, what could happen would be of biblical proportions. And in fact, what will happen will be of biblical proportions. And help us, use us to prepare people for that certainty of what's coming. Pray that we will be able to share the faith, that their only hope is faith in Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.